Welcome to the Chief Development Officer podcast with Charles Aris Executive Search. My name is Josh Kodalinky, and I lead our healthcare, finance, and corporate development search practice here. This is a podcast for all current and future Chief Development Officers, where we interview some of the top talent in the corporate development ranks today, and all things related to running the M&A function. This is a part of our broader series of podcasts called Executive Exchange, where we go behind the scenes with C-suite leaders in our core functional and industry verticals. Today, we're on with my partner, Derek Gracie, who leads our business services, finance, and corporate development search vertical. Derek, say hello to all the corp devers out there and introduce yourself, please, sir.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, hi, everyone. As Josh mentioned, I'm Derek Gracie. I'm a practice leader here at Charles Aris, and I lead our business and consumer services, finance, and corporate development practice. So primarily working with high-growth private equity-backed portfolio companies on their M&A and finance leadership needs.
And I think anybody who listens to this knows that it's a white-hot sector right now, for sure. And today, we're really excited to have Ellie Sparling join the podcast. Ellie is the Executive Vice President of Strategy and M&A at AI Fire, which is a true arc portfolio company in the fire and life safety industry. Ellie's an Amherst College grad, has an MBA from Northwestern, is the rare, which we're excited to talk with her about, former investment banker and consultant, and has been overseeing M&A at AI Fire for almost 7 years. We're extremely excited to have Ellie join the podcast today. Ellie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Josh and Derek.
Fantastic. And I gave a very, 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 very high-level introduction to your background. Why don't we start with this, Ellie? Why don't we start with your story in your own words, and just kind of from high school grad, going to Amherst, and then moving into, going way back. But we'd love to hear from all the corp devers out there, just kind of the general walk of your career. And then we'll certainly come back and ask you some more in-depth questions.
Sure, Josh. So as you noted, I graduated from Amherst College. And, as a liberal arts grad, I'm a general athlete at heart, someone who likes a lot of things, and candidly, investment banking and M&A specifically really piqued my interest as a way to kind of be a generalist, but get to know a lot of industries and verticals while learning a process. If I jump forward, M&A, much like consulting, are both apprenticeship programs. That's what we do here in fire and life safety as well. So I was an M&A analyst, spent almost 7 years in investment banking. That's pretty unusual for someone who doesn't become a career investment banker. Got to do deals across all kinds of verticals, did the firm at the time's largest transaction, which was almost $1 billion at the time, which back then was quite a large transaction in M&A. It was a middle market firm primarily advising entrepreneurs, small family businesses, helping them with, achieve an exit. Didn't have maybe a next in line person to transition the business to. Really love the work, particularly in hindsight. And I think it certainly enables my current role and informs what I do here at AI Fire. But after 6-7 years, I really, as a liberal arts alum, I kind of wanted to get more familiar with finance and accounting. I learned a lot on the job, but hadn't really taken any of those kinds of classes. So I decided to go to Northwestern, where I got my MBA and majored in finance and strategy and marketing, really to kind of expand my wheelhouse. It was a great experience at Northwestern, but I still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I still liked a lot of things, and so management consulting felt like a great answer and solution for that. I thought that'll keep all the doors open. I'll again learn a really great toolkit. And so I went to Bain Consulting out in LA. I guess I should say I've spent up until recently, I spent the majority of my career in Los Angeles. So I was in the LA office at Bain, again, working across a number of industries and verticals that, I could certainly speak more to. Great experience, but really knew pretty quickly that while I like professional services, I was ready to be in a real company, taking my insight into action and growing a business. And so took an opportunity to go to Tom's Shoes, which at the time was owned by Bain Cap. Worked there for about 2 years, was purely sort of on the strategic side of the business and working with the management team on, corporate strategy and quarterly reporting and all of that. But when Audax came calling and said, we have an opportunity in the facility services space and a lower middle market company that we think is going to grow really quickly through acquisition, it felt like the perfect combination, frankly, of my skill set. Almost the job was kind of made for me and my background. And needless to say, I've been here for almost 7 years. So it's it has been a great fit, and continues to be a great fit.
Let me, Derek, if I could, let's put Ellie, let's put her in the hot seat right off the bat. Whenever I've bumped into the ex-banker and ex-consultants, it's a rare group. You have to ask the question, which one was more difficult and why? Which one did you find to be more challenging and why?
That's a great question. I mean, I really liked in hindsight being an investment banker. It was very long hours, as is the reputation, but I love sort of the transactional nature, the exit. You really had a result. So I think the hardest role for me was really in consulting, because you could and did do really great, interesting work, but you didn't necessarily get the result. You didn't necessarily get to shepherd that through and make sure that the company achieved that change or, met that objective. You kind of had to hold it, leave it in their hands. And so that was hard for me. And I love the toolkit of the role, but that wasn't something that I knew pretty quickly I would want to be doing. I wanted to sort of see that change through. I loved the ideation part, but I think that's my answer.
Awesome.
And Ellie, you touched on this, kind of the decision to get into both banking early on and then ultimately consulting coming out of business school. You touched on these transitions, but I think a question that earlier career folks often are faced with is like, how do they know it's time to leave? How did you make those decisions, I guess, especially banking? 7 years in banking, I'd have to imagine you thought about leaving banking prior to those 7 years, but kind of how did you know it's time to leave banking? And then ultimately Bain as well, how did you know it's time to leave consulting?
My experience in banking was somewhat unique in that I'd gone to a small liberal arts college. I actually had gone to a small secondary school. So a boutique investment bank felt like a great fit for me. Almost exactly a year to the anniversary in the role as an analyst, our small firm, middle market firm that was well established in LA, was acquired by Wells Fargo. And so at that time, the strategy was, we're not going to go become an investment bank. Wells Fargo very much felt like a commercial bank, but they thought M&A was the one piece of investment banking that they were missing an opportunity as they saw their clients possibly achieving an exit, leaving the bank. So they kind of left us alone, but it still sort of gave us new opportunities. We obviously had new engagement. So the role was shifting a little bit. Opportunities seemed more vast. Certainly didn't feel right as a second or third year analyst to leave. And then the financial crisis happened. So I'll date myself. And lo and behold, we found ourselves acquiring Wachovia, and Wachovia had a much larger investment bank, and we became a part of the middle market group of this combined investment bank. But needless to say, we weren't just doing M&A, we were doing capital raising and other kind of work. So again, didn't feel like the right time. Kept growing, had gotten promoted early to associate, was getting a lot of opportunity. So really for me, it was the fact that the role was changing faster than, say, the typical every 3 years sort of in investment banking up until a point you're kind of getting a new job. In this case, the opportunities were different, the clients were different, and I was really learning. But it got to a point, Derek, where I thought, if I'm going to go to business school, especially as a female, I kind of need to do this. And my now husband also was thinking of going to business school. And so we sort of used each other to say, okay, there's never going to be a perfect time. And if you stay probably one more year, you'll be a VP, and why would you leave? So I used that opportunity. That was really the reason behind the transition at that time to business school, because I really wanted to round out that skill set. I wanted to take more accounting, more finance, et cetera, sort of sit in the classroom and learn the fundamentals in that way. As a consultant, I had kids. I started the role as a management consultant with a young, frankly, an infant. And my husband's also in professional services. So having a two-parent household in professional services is a hard thing. It's actually, I think it might be more rare, Josh, than a former consultant investment banker. I said, because I really knew pretty quickly, wow, I'm learning a lot. These are some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. I want to have the kind of core experience, but I knew I didn't want to go be a partner at Bain. I'm going to do the sort of standard sort of 2-year experience, and then I'm going to go into another role because we both can't do this. And this is like, he's on this path. He likes it. This path for me is, I see the benefits of it, but I want to use that and go do, I think, what most former consultants do, which is go into strategy or go into a line of business and that was a pretty quick answer for me, Derek, within the first couple cases that I did.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Ellie. Another question. So obviously you're an M&A and strategy leader today. You've spent some time just doing strategy without M&A
Yeah.
previously. Looking back on your career, when would you say you caught the deal bug, the M&A deal bug? Did that trace back to banking? But like, when did you get that itch that says, hey, this is a path I want to keep chasing and ultimately land in that seat?
I think it actually took the benefit of some hindsight. I think when you're living in investment banking, it's a very demanding job. You don't always have that opportunity to step back. You're oftentimes doing 2 to 3 transactions at a time when you're an investment banker working with multiple partners, with multiple clients. It really wasn't until I would say I loved the work. So the bug was there. I loved the transactional nature. I love project management, execution. I love all of the elements of it, the negotiating, the client. I think probably my favorite part is the client engagement, or in this case for me, the future manager and future grower of our business, because that's the kind of deals that we're doing at AI Fire. But when the opportunity kind of came to me to go have a dual role where I get to use all of the parts of my brain, this felt like the ideal combination. I get to do something that's transactional while growing a business and getting to have a really cross-functional view of the business. So for me, I get to have the full meal. And that's really rewarding because I understand all of the elements of our business and kind of how M&A is propelling the growth of the business and enabling other opportunities for the business. So it's not just the deals for me, it's how it kind of helps shape and align with our strategic goals.
Before we get too far away from professional services, Ellie, make all of our listeners smile a little bit and go down memory lane with us. Longest day that you had professional services, whether it was we got this. I got a call from my manager at 4:00 on a Friday, and I left on Sunday evening to take a shower to come back. What, like, the longest day you've had, either at Bain, Wells Fargo, one of your other stops?
Well, probably when I was an analyst as a banker, earlier on in our firm, we didn't have like first of all, we had a full-time person working like kind of in our print room, helping with books and things like that. But that person doesn't work 24/7. So the person who works the print room after hours is, the analyst. So certainly there were a couple deals. There wasn't probably any one, but there were definitely a couple where you're waiting for comments from an MD to finalize a SIM or to get like decks out for an MP the next morning, especially if it were local, where you're sitting at your desk waiting for those. Then you're putting those in, and then I would be printing. And God help you if the printer kind of wasn't working right or something got jammed. And so there was definitely, I have vivid memories of asking my associate or VP, where do you want the materials put, like on your front stoop, so that you have it in the morning when the dog doesn't get it, and you're like pulling up in at that time in Beverly Hills or in Venice, California, in the canals, and you're like, it's a cover of darkness delivering materials. So I have more than one of those memories, and then I'd probably get to bed, very, very late hours, early morning. But I guess one other story, Josh, we ended up remodeling our office when I was an investment bank, and there was a morning, it was probably 3, 4 in the morning, and the construction team showed up, and we scared each other because they rolled into the office, and I was still in my cubicle with my headphones on. And I'm like the only person, or maybe there was probably another analyst, but they were sitting somewhere else. And we just scared the living daylights out of each other because they never worked in an environment where people were still there when they show up. And,
Sure.
And now in my industry, obviously people work pretty early mornings. So yeah, there were some early mornings for sure.
Good stuff. That'll make all of our investment bankers, consultants, and transaction advisor people smile. So
yeah,
they're not going through it alone. Derek, let me kick it over to you.
No, definitely not. If you're doing it right, you're not doing it alone.
Jumping back to your current role, Ellie. So when you think about joining AI Fire, I'd be curious to hear the nuances or differences, challenges below just the surface level of coming from a private equity portfolio role focused on purely organic strategy to a highly acquisitive private equity portfolio focused on M&A.
I would say that the role at Tom's informed a lot of the things that I think about or what I was able to do very early on in our days at AI Fire when we were rolling without the full management team. So at Tom's, I reported into the board on strategic initiatives, but really that meant that to get those initiatives done, and I think this is something that some folks in professional services may not understand or appreciate, right? When you work at Bain or McKinsey or BCG or Deloitte, you're coming up with ideas and you're building the decks, but you oftentimes aren't executing on that strategy. And so really at Tom's, I was kind of the chief project manager too, because we would develop a strategy, whether it was to, narrow in on our SKUs and be more profitable and what we were kind of putting out to market, or looking at new factories, or, doing the quarterly review. But I did it hand in hand with the department heads, and got to really know how they think about their business. They don't see themselves as cross-functional. They are experts, deep experts in merchandising or marketing or finance. And so it really helped me think about how strategy can go from being a great idea to being really achievable in having to work with very different people, particularly in a creative sort of nonprofit environment. It was a corporate environment, but it had these different angles at Tom's. So that when I came to AI Fire, I was really comfortable working with different departments on areas that I wasn't familiar with, and a much deeper level than, just that sort of, I don't want to say the work of a consultant is more service level, but you have to get smart really fast and be really 80-20. That isn't like, to actually go and do it, you got to get deep. And I loved kind of Tom's helped me understand that I could, number one, give me the confidence that I could do it. But number two, just made me much more comfortable operating in environments that I didn't know anything about. Fire and life safety, I never really thought about it, frankly, more than that there's an extinguisher on the wall and, when you go to the dentist office or wherever. So
that's great.
That's helpful.
You touched on an interesting point, kind of that cross-functional collaboration, working well with other functions in both roles. When you think about the next generation of M&A leadership talent, like how can someone who's a little bit earlier in their career start to branch out and develop that skill set?
I mean, I think when you're maybe specifically in an investment bank, the best thing you can do is take advantage of the opportunities, every opportunity to be on every call, really listen to and get familiar with the other folks involved in the deal, not just the CEO or the CFO of that client, but try to get as enmeshed as you can and think of everything as an opportunity to learn. I think that the number one thing I will say is that your career path is a long learning journey. And so to be cross-functional, you got to be open to and genuinely interested in, ideally, in how all of these roles come together to make the business successful. And, at AI Fire, my role in M&A is highly cross-functional, even in the execution of the deal, right? I'm collaborating with HR on offer letters and getting familiar with the team in the census so that we onboard those people properly. What are the benefits and how is that going to work with our risk and safety teams, so that we can onboard them and their fleet, and with the finance and accounting team on the quality of earnings, and all of the work that comes after the close with opening balance sheet work, getting them on all of our reporting and accounting systems. So I could go on, right? But truly every department is essential for the deal. And if you're really not just processing the paperwork, right? As an investment bank, you're kind of making sure that the seller's documents get to the buyer and that the buyer has what they need to make a decision on value. In our case, as a buy side, on the buy side, we need to understand so that we can properly onboard that company and that team. We're in the people business in fire life safety. I mean, when you think about how active the facility services or business services space is, the thing to bear in mind in a corp dev role there is that you're not making anything. There are no widgets. There isn't a process improvement necessarily to be at play here. It's less about cost savings. It's more about growing the top line and the bottom line. Well, the best way to do that is to understand the team. And what is that team? What do they value? What are you going to offer them to make it better for them so that they stay and that they grow the business? So that inherently is incredibly cross-functional. And then obviously on the integration side, post-closing, which I do lead that as well, that also is highly cross-functional.
That's great. Piggybacking on your team piece there, thinking within the function, within your
Mhm,
M&A and
mhm.
strategy function, talk to us a little bit about your team, ideal team structure, how you've thought about evolving that from, almost 7 years ago to where it is today.
Yeah. Um, so I think we've tried to strike the right balance when we were smaller of leveraging as much third-party support, and then over time we've added people to the function, and not just third party, but I would say our private equity partners too initially were more involved. I mean, and part of that was all of us kind of learning and developing this function as sort of the third leg of the stool of our business. We have two operating companies, so we think of at AI Fire as M&A as the third leg. So we were learning that together, learning with our former PE owners, Audax at that time. So they were pretty involved. So I didn't really think at that time, I don't need, an analyst or an associate as I think of like a deal team, traditional deal team structure, because I kind of had those arms and legs with Audax. They helped me, provide additional bandwidth there on deal evaluation and support and diligence. We were pretty quick to identify the right third parties. I'm very fortunate to work with a law firm and a quality of earnings partner, and they've done almost, I think, every deal we've done. So Dax teed up those relationships, and so they're very deep, and that allows us to, I think, work really efficiently together. And so probably 3-4 years ago is when I thought, okay, we really need more support, particularly on the integration side of the deals. Someone who can be that quarterback, kind of like I am on the front end, learn from me on how I've been doing that, but then be able to do more faster, right? That's what your private equity firm always wants, do more faster. And so had a great sort of associate integration lead. Now I have a team that has sort of sees the full life cycle of the deal. So they're, I think of my law firm has 2 associates. They work very much hand in hand together. They're sort of a lead on each deal, but they know of all of the deals. That's sort of how I think about my team today. They are on the full life cycle of the deal, from sourcing all the way through integration. They're aware of all of the deals in the pipeline, but they kind of, over time, making sure the bandwidth is appropriate, get tapped to kind of be that primary, particularly on the integration side. I think that works well. We have used third parties for some sourcing support as well. We don't have in-house. Maybe that might be the next phase.
Great. Thinking back, knowing what you know now, how would you have started positioning yourself differently, if at all, to be in the position that you're in today when you think about that career journey?
Derek, hindsight is always 2020. I think I was very fortunate to have the experiences I did that really kind of empowered me in my role today. I think you absolutely could be successful in this role having just been an investment banker. I think it would be harder to have just been a consultant doing M&A. I think that there is a specific skill set and an experience set. You do, I sat in the ring fence at Bain and did PE diligences, but again, that's just getting smart on an industry. It's really not the M&A process. So, that sort of, I think, table stakes, if you will, is to have some investment banking experience. But I think an investment banker that is particularly, former M&A, the more opportunities they can have to see the other parts of the business. There are certainly many, many, many roles out there that are purely just the M&A seat in private equity. So I think you would have no shortage of opportunities. And since people can't see me, in air quotes, just having been an investment banker. But what I would encourage people to do, if that has been their path, to maybe say a manager or a director of M&A or corp dev in a business, is raise your hand to get involved in other parts of the business where possible. Really try to see through on the integration side, because to me, if you, again, don't just want to be in that M&A seat, but you maybe say, like, I want to do this, and then I want to go run a line of business, or I want to, see more of the business, whatever form that may be, it'll just be harder to do that if you've just been doing the deals.
That's great. Having known you for a little while, I have some insight into how you think about your team and developing your team. Yeah. When you think back to leaders that you've worked with and just people that you've worked with throughout your career, who comes to mind as someone who made a big impact on you or helped get you to where you are in some way, whether it was a formal mentor or not?
I think the number of mentors would be sort of too many to list. I think the biggest thing that I would say my appreciation for would be those individuals, especially as young as sort of senior analysts on deals. When I had first started, when I'm most impressed or been most appreciative of a mentor is someone who gave me the opportunities to take the first pass at things, even if it was made their life harder. I think it taught me how important it was that when I got promoted, the more I could give to people, the faster they would learn, the better and more confident they'd become, and the more leverage eventually I would get. And that leverage is key, right? For you to be able to go do and learn other things yourself. So the people if I look back in my career that I'm most appreciative of were those case team leaders at Bain or those associates or senior analysts when I really started so green. I mean, barely knew Excel and certainly I'd taken like one accounting class at, Amherst didn't even teach accounting. So I had to go to Smith to take an accounting class. So needless to say, I didn't know that much. It's those people that I think, wow, how selfless were they to give me those opportunities? And I just really encourage others to do the same, even if it is harder in the moment when you're really busy in those professional services roles.
It's great.
So Ellie, if you stepped into a new head of M&A, head of strategy and M&A, head of corporate development role today, what would your first month, your first quarter, and your first year plan kind of all look like? What would be the top things that you're trying to accomplish within those timeframes?
Well, I think the most important thing is to try to get smart as quickly as possible. I mean, I think as a manager and as a leader, I think it's really important to acknowledge that it really does take 3-4 months to kind of know where the bathroom is in any job. I mean, that's just the truth. But even in a leadership role, you obviously put a lot of pressure on yourself to produce and to add value as quickly as possible. So I think in the first month or first quarter, what I would really try to do is get as smart as possible. So sit in the room as much as possible. Again, even in areas that are not as relevant maybe to M&A or corp dev per se. And kind of by luck in my current role, a couple of different strategic initiatives sort of fell in my lap, so to speak, right away in the first month, in the first quarter. And I just jumped in feet first. So my advice would be sit in as much as that you can, even if it's a finance department meeting, but you're understanding, okay, what are their pain points, or maybe they've done deals in the past and they're muddying through some challenges that came as a result of that. Learn what worked well for the team thus far, what have been pain points for the team to date, so that you can, as you're getting smarter on the business, wrap those into, okay, well then how can I make this function better? In the case of AI Fire, they'd done a couple of deals, and actually Audax had already done 2 deals in the first 6 months in their hold, and I started about 5 months in. So they'd closed one deal and had been integrating it. They closed the second deal on the day I interviewed for the job. And so needless to say, they had already kind of hit the ground running. So I got to kind of see midstream what was working in those integrations, what was working for my team, and then really quickly learning how can we make the next set of deals better. So I think that's sort of my first and foremost, my advice, the first month, the first quarter. I think in the first year, hopefully you've gotten a couple of deals under your belt. Again, while you're sitting in the seat, you're able to then continually learn and adjust and get feedback from the other department and executive team members to say what's working for this team, what's working for you. I think then last but not least is really when you start any role is sort of understanding, okay, what's the company's strategy today? Where do we think the strategy is going to be under our hold, right? Say the next 2 to 3, 4 years. And then what do we think then, what's the 5 to 10 year strategy, right? I think those were things I thought a little bit less about when I came onto AI Fire, because we were a much younger team. We were building out the management team. We were putting people on the bus as the bus was moving, so to speak. So, but absolutely, if I were to start over in a new role, I'd be thinking, okay, what's the company's goals today? What are the company's goals in the next 2 to 3 years, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me throw this at you to be more from the lens of like a young professional. You were one,
Yes.
Now you're mentoring one, and when you see young professionals and they don't
Yep.
have
Oh, I have lots of opinions, Josh. Just ask the
Yeah.
question.
I hear you. So Ellie, just following up on that, you talked about mentorship and kind of people that had a big impact on you. Obviously in 2008, 2009, I doubt there was remote work at Wells Fargo. I'm sure when you were at Bain, you were probably traveling on site to client
Yep.
work. So in essence, you learned the job like a lot of people did that started
Shoulder to
working
shoulder, Josh.
pre-COVID.
Shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, that's right. And you learn by osmosis sometimes, right? You didn't even know what you didn't know, and you were immersed in it. Now, kind of seeing it from the other side as a manager and someone who has to build teams, when you see these young professionals, it's a different world working remote. What have you done, or what have you put in place, or what advice would you give to young, ambitious professionals that are essentially trying to learn the job and do it at a high level, but as you said, are shoulder to shoulder and around it every day? They have to think about it, force it to kind of schedule Zoom meetings. Like, what advice would you give to young professionals starting out today?
Okay, it's a great question. Because Josh, I think when I was telling you earlier about my experience with some of these young, I'll call them young mentors, because those were some of the most impactful to me professionally. I have a visceral memory as probably first couple of weeks on the job as an analyst, where I, of course, done what I thought was my best work, putting together probably a table in Excel. And, I thought I'd formatted, I thought I'd checked it and reviewed it, and I sent it off to the associate. And I remember Andrew coming back to my desk, having printed it out, and he had a ruler and a pen and a highlighter, and like editing the slide in front of me, showing me where I'd made mistakes. Not mean, just like, this needs to be better. This is what you didn't see. And I can't thank him enough, and the effort that all of the people that sort of paved the way for me, that they took to do that. And so a remote work environment obviously makes that harder on both individuals, I actually think. And candidly, my strongest advice would be try to be as remote as little as possible, and as in any job as early on as possible. I don't think I'd be sitting in this seat today if it were not for having been in person, and particularly, a lot of people joke that my boss and I have sort of like a secondhand language. I sat next door to him, and he just, shout, "Hey, Ellie," when I'd come into his office and I'd join calls. I'd sit in the room and listen to him be on calls. Sometimes they were just his calls. Sometimes I get to participate, but it was always because I was there and he was there and we were working together. We travel a lot in our jobs in M&A. I think, frankly, partners and MDs and investment banks and in professional services travel a lot, sometimes with the clients, with the team, sometimes not. But the more you can be with those, I'll call them elders, learning from them, but even just your case team leader, your associate, your VP is critical. And do more faster, right? Again, not just like in the deal world, but it's reps. And I think of it as, I was a college athlete. I didn't just show up on the ice at the beginning of the season, having not skated, having not been in conditioning. Prior to that, I was always working to be in shape, but you don't start off being in shape. You have to build the muscles. And interestingly, I would say, with the benefit of hindsight of having been an analyst and then an associate, et cetera, and then same within professional services as a consultant, I now look at the world I live in today, which is fire and life safety, which is an apprenticeship model, right? People come in as sort of what they call an apprentice. They have a leader with them. They're working shoulder to shoulder. It's actually, of course, essential services. So during COVID, we didn't shut down. Those technicians were, inspecting facilities, and their apprentice was with them learning on the job. That every job is that. I don't think I understood that no matter how glamorous or white shoe investment banking might seem or sound, it's an apprenticeship model. Every job is. The more you can be with your mentors and colleagues, and then frankly, in the world of corporate development and making M&A successful, it's really on the integration side. The integration piece, those new companies, those baby duckling companies, I'll call them, they don't know anything. They're looking for help. They've known how to run their great business, but to make that business better and within your portfolio of a business, having that associate with them, supporting them, not letting any questions or concerns fester, but raising them with the different departments. All of that is done best in person. People don't always pick up the phone. My other piece of advice is pick up the phone. Don't text, don't email, pick up the phone. If you've had more than one, email exchange. If you're on email 3, you've missed the message. You got to get on the phone, or better yet, on Teams. I'm on teams all day long on camera with my associates, with my team. Again, I think that's the closest thing I can approximate when my team is scattered about, to being in person. That's my advice. Sorry if it was a little long-winded, but I do feel like that's so essential for, you can't skip the steps. You
Yeah.
got to do all the jobs.
It'd be good for some young people to hear that, which is good. Derek,
Indeed.
go ahead, ship review.
Yeah, so Ellie, in addition to the banking and consulting profile making you unique, you know this as well as we do, but there are not a lot of people who look like you in the seats that you're in. There are not a lot of women in private equity portfolio, M&A and strategy leadership roles. Could you just talk to us a little bit about that? Just your thoughts on that, how you've managed that, and ultimately, I think even better, any advice you'd give to young women coming up within corporate development in that space.
Oh, it's true. There are fewer of us in these seats. There are certainly fewer of us in the seats in investment banking at the MD level and professional services at the partner level, and in private equity. Look, I've had nothing but terrific experiences and great mentors. The majority of them, frankly, have been men because that's who are most of the people in front of me. I don't know. I think that, again, I take every experience, try to look for people that want to support and encourage you and want to share their knowledge with you, and in whatever form that may be and whatever their background may be. And I think I've learned the most in my career more recently, oftentimes from other business owners who I'm fortunate enough to have them trust me to buy their companies and their life's work and bring their people into the fold of our business. I mean, it is a deal, but for them, it is incredibly meaningful. So, and oftentimes that's a husband and wife team. And so I think more often the husband is the sort of fire and life safety professional, and the wife has run the entire back office. But that business and that office wouldn't hum along without her too. So I think they're kind of the unsung heroes of those businesses, and I'm privileged to work with them both. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that this isn't easy. It's not easy because you have to be really fortunate to have a really incredible partner. If you're going to do this kind of work as a female, even if you're pretty equally balanced, which my spouse and I are, and sort of trying to divvy up all of the responsibilities of having, two younger kids. What I will say to any woman is that having kids is very disruptive, and it's certainly much more disruptive for us than it is for our spouses, male or female. The person who had the child is the one that's probably going to be the most disrupted in those first couple of months, in the first year of life, and then thereafter it's anybody's guess how that family works out everything. But I will say, so I had my first child in my second year of business school, which makes me especially unusual. Went into management consulting with a 6-month-old. Had my second child right after I started at Tom's. I've obviously been in a number of groups of working female professionals across a number of industries, both from my time at Amherst, as well as my time in both of my careers, as well as my time at Kellogg. It doesn't matter when you have your kids, it's going to be super disruptive. I think of it as like, taking a road trip, and there will be a time when you can put your foot on the gas harder. And there will be times when you have to kind of do the best you can to be maybe in the seat that is comfortable for you, so that you can try to do your best at feeling like you're constantly failing at everything. I certainly had a period of time in my career that it felt like I was, you're not doing great at anything. I think most people would say I was crazy for taking a job that was 25% travel when I had a 13-month-old who I was in the process of, weaning. So that is not typical, but I don't think many people would have done that if they hadn't done all of the other, I'll call it, reps and working out. And like my idea of 60 hours a week might feel very differently than someone who's only ever worked 30 or 40. So I think part of it is I was sort of built for this. And so for me, this felt like great. I mean, much easier than consulting at Bain, where I was on the road 4 days a week, much more manageable with my family. And I was really fortunate to have a boss who said, this is very transparently, this is what this is. But if you can travel this day or that day, and we can be flexible on when you do it, and you can consult your spouse if they're traveling or not, because my husband travels a lot. That worked for me. It might not work for everybody. But what I would say to women is, if you think you can do it, don't say no. Maybe go a little over your skis to do it, because you'll figure it out. You'll build some of those muscles as you're doing it. But in the meantime of that most disruptive time of your life, try to just keep hands on the wheel and your foot just on the gas a little bit, because it's just so much harder if you step off entirely or step out of the car entirely. And I will say that my friends who had their kids later, it wasn't really any less disruptive, because if they were already a partner at Bain, then they have a book of business they need to maintain. And everybody's just kidding themselves if their company is going to say, oh, don't need to keep selling that. It's going to be hard no matter when you do it.
That's incredible. No, thank you. Thank you. That's great.
And so, Ellie, let's move to the deal talk section of the podcast. We're going to ask you kind of for short, punchy answers on a variety of different topics. The first things that pop into your head. And let me throw the first one at you. Favorite deal over the course of your career?
The first deal that I did at AI Fire, where I really let it soup to nuts, we bought a business up in New Hampshire that really enabled our business to grow and expand geographically significantly. So we did this one transaction, and then it allowed us to sort of fill in that region of the country. And it was sort of a catalyst also then for our strategy of what works, because we learned, buy a slightly bigger business, buy one with leadership, then you can go do more, build more, and you don't necessarily need quite as much horsepower on those other acquisitions.
What about first thing that pops in your head if I said deal that got away that you still think of?
That's a great question. If I think about that, we've been really fortunate at AI Fire to do all of the deals that I think we really wanted to do. It's always competitive, but I guess I go back to my investment banking days when I was an associate. So I was sort of the project manager. We were fortunate to sign up a very well-known healthy beverage, sort of an electrolyte beverage that was a well-known brand. It was a family-owned business. We were very excited, and we ran a terrific process. And we got almost, I would say, to the finish line, having had management presentations. And, we were coming down to one party doing diligence, and the family decided they weren't ready to sell. And I can tell you, it was pretty devastating to feel like you'd done them a great service, that the business was going to be in terrific hands, and that there was nothing we could have really done differently. And they walked away, and it was a significant multiple at the time. I think even today would be viewed as very competitive and a terrific outcome for the family and the shareholders. So I don't think we did anything wrong. There's no regrets we could have, but boy, was it tough to not sell the business, not be able to tell anyone we'd advised this well-known company. So
what about first thing pops in your head when we say trickiest financial issue you dealt with on a deal?
Without question, we've had a couple businesses where, the quality of earnings didn't come in, when I was both an investment banker, or we had a deal sort of around the time of the pandemic, not pandemic related, but 3 years ago, there was a large ice storm in Texas. And so we were buying a business in Texas, and their technicians didn't go out on the road for almost 2 weeks because there was a state of emergency. Needless to say, that month didn't perform quite the same as what you would have anticipated. And we had to sort of work out an earn-out type structure. We knew, and the owner knew, that it was an anomaly, but our owners and lenders might not have felt quite the same. So we said, we've got to make this work. We've got to be creative. It still wasn't easy. And I will say my boss, our CEO, did at the end of the day, it's not an easy message to change the structure necessarily of a deal, but we made it happen. Everybody was happy in the end. The business made their earn-out, but when it was happening, and we knew all the reasons for it, but it was tough.
What about trickiest non-financial issue you dealt with on a deal?
That's always people related, finding the right structure for the owners, if they've had a different comp structure that is not aligned to a normal business, like let's say non-owner comp, or key people, and helping retain them and finding the right way to motivate and incentivize them. It is always about people if it's non-financial.
What about first thing that pops in your head? Lessons learned in presenting to the investment committee.
Put yourself in their shoes. It's your, think of it as your money. I mean, I'm an investor in our business. It's significant for me. So I think about it as if this were my capital, how would I want to deploy it? Is this the right way to deploy it? And every single deal, you need to have conviction that make sure you know what questions they're going to ask before they ask them, and feel pretty good about your answers, because you should feel like this is the right deal that we should all be doing.
Ellie, thanks so much for your time. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
Great viewpoints that you provided, hopefully for all the people listening on your career, as well as, key things to be aware of as they're looking to move into the seat. Folks, if you want to look up Ellie Sparling on LinkedIn, she's under Elena Sparling. She is the head of strategy and M&A at AI Fire. Derek Gracie leads our business services, finance, and corporate development practice. Look them up as well. And again, Ellie, one more time, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you. It's been a pleasure.